If you are a fan of the Final Fantasy series, you probably know of the infamous "You Spoony Bard" line, originally appearing in Final Fantasy IV as an odd translation choice for an insult towards Edward. But you might not know that Spoony is a term used amongst disabled people thanks to Christine Miserandino's essay titled The Spoon Theory, where she used spoons as a metaphor to explain managing energy as someone with lupus to her non-disabled friend. Spoony has become widely used by those of us with what are considered invisible disabilities, such as chronic pain, illness, or neurodivergence. What are the odds that 12 years after Final Fantasy IV's release, this word I've literally never heard used anywhere else becomes so important to the disabled community, and that Edward is indeed a Spoony Bard? So in this video, let's take a close look at Edward through a lens of disability. A big change in Final Fantasy IV from the previous entries of the series is all of the characters have a fixed class with special abilities unique to them. One of Edward's abilities is Hide, which removes himself from battle. While hiding, he cannot be targeted by enemies in any way, but he also cannot help your party. Whenever Edward's health is low, he will automatically hide. You, the player, are unable to control this. It is an interesting mechanic for a turn-based party RPG. Usually if a playable character is acting outside of our control, it is to provide a bonus of some kind, or they have received a negative status effect from the enemy. Like how confusion will make your character take random actions on their turn. Now, this behavior could be read as Edward just being cowardly, especially since he is treated like one by our heroes when we first meet him.
Coward, you're a man, aren't you? A grown man! Stop crying. I have.
Edward's home has just been bombed, killing his parents and loved one Anna. On top of this, he is the one now in charge of rebuilding and taking care of everyone still living in Damcyan. I think we would all be shook up in this scenario, but I don't think many of us would respond like this.
You're right. I'm nothing but a coward, just as you say.
We would more likely be angry. But Edward gets treated like shit by a group of adventurers he doesn't even know, and then still agrees to help them. Just for added context here, Rydia is a child who is saying she has already stopped crying about the genocide that happened to her people one day earlier, killing everyone she knew, including her mother. The Dark Knight Cecil was responsible for that genocide, which was one day after a different massacre he was in charge of. And here he is in the aftermath of another atrocity by the army he served, assaulting one of its survivors as a persuasion tactic to get their help.
You're not the only one who's grieving. Please, I've desperate need of your help right now.
Meanwhile, Edward, overwhelmed with grief, just seems surprised anyone would ever consider asking him for help.
But how could I help you?
As if he has no sense of self-worth. This is contrasted with how deeply Edward seems to care about everyone else. Not only in his willingness to help our adventurers, but even creatures most would assume to just be monsters. Edward never allows himself to feel proud for helping either. He is consumed by self-doubt. And his ghost even visits just to remind him to believe in himself. Many disabled people can struggle with not feeling good enough as a form of internalized ableism. We are constantly bombarded with messages that there is something wrong with us, whether that is through the media,
Why can't you just be normal?
facing hostile environments, or just other people. If you are visibly disabled, people will regularly come up and say things like, "You are so strong, I could never live like you," without any empathy or awareness as to how it feels to hear strangers telling you they would rather be dead than be you. The sentiments are not always worded as blatantly, and they don't just come from strangers though. Listen to Amani Barbarin's experience when she was at an after-school program.
I was about 10 years old, and it was being run by a very religious woman, and she was always praying for a miracle for me. And I wanted that miracle so bad. So I remember one day just putting my crutches in a trash can and running around the gymnasium without them. And it made sense to me. It was like a triumph over my disability. But at the end of my run, and after everybody clapped for me, I still had to take my crutches out of the trash can in order to go home.
If you're not visibly disabled, it is less likely you will be approached randomly, but people will regularly assume the worst of you. This can take many forms, and it starts when you are very young. Maybe you experienced sensory issues, so you were labeled a picky eater. Had meltdowns, you were spoiled. The most common assumption for all disabilities, though, is that we are lazy. If we have to miss a lot of school or work, well, we must be slackers. And don't even think about asking for accommodations because you should not be using those as a crutch. The fact that using something as a crutch has a negative connotation to it really says it all. I think Edward had these experiences because he is a Spoony. Something like chronic pain fits perfectly for him, especially when you consider a few other moments. Like when the party is attempting to defend Fable, Edward trips as they are retreating to a better position. Shortly after this battle, Rydia notices Edward is shaking and asks if he is cold, to which he dismisses. This would also explain why he hides. When Edward is low or out of spoons, it will be more difficult to do what he wants with his body. And Edward would be rightfully worried about the consequences if he did not preserve at least some spoons. Spoons are just a resource, like health or mana, except you won't know for sure how many spoons you will have on any given day.
When your spoons are gone, they are gone. Sometimes you can borrow against tomorrow's spoons, but just think how hard tomorrow will be with less. The person who is sick always lives with the looming thought that tomorrow may be the day that a cold comes, or an infection, or any number of things that could be very dangerous. So you do not want to run low on spoons, because you never know when you truly will need them.
Christine Miserandino was referring to her lupus, but this dynamic exists for many disabilities even if the level of danger involved may be different. Despite Edward's best efforts to preserve some spoons, he clearly was already borrowing against his future by the time he got to this ship, which then is attacked. The next time we see Edward, he is on bed rest. Even though he is injured, he wants to go with the party to help them. Once again, showing how powerful shame can be, that Edward would even consider trying to go in the state he is in. Fortunately, Edward listens to the doctor and the others to stay and rest. Notice how different the reception is to Edward this time. He is disabled in a way that is visible to our adventurers, and of course, there is a doctor backing him up. Most people assume they will know when someone is disabled, or at very least, someone should be able to provide medical proof. Unfortunately, it can be extremely difficult getting a diagnosis for something like chronic pain. There is not always a test to run that can prove something by looking at a set of numbers. Sometimes we just have to believe someone else's experience. And what do you do if the person themselves does not know they are disabled? Part of the reason I find Edward so relatable is because he does not know, which adds to the guilt and doubt he feels about himself. You might be wondering how someone does not know they are in pain all the time. And the simple answer is, if you experience something all the time, how do you know it is not normal? Do you know those charts they use to assess your pain level in a hospital setting? Well, it turns out that if you are always feeling pain, you are much more likely to rate your pain lower if you recognize it at all. An 8 to anyone else might just feel like a 3 to you, because what you normally experience, you're going to assume is at the lower end of the scale.
I would consider the chronic pains I experience to be very minor. And yes, I get the irony in saying that, but what I mean is the pain I do regularly experience generally does not have a large impact on my day-to-day life, thanks to finding routines to help mitigate the worst of it. But it is still enough to affect my perception of what my body should feel, causing me to dismiss or overlook things that could grow into real problems if ignored. This is only made worse by our healthcare system in the United States being extremely frustrating and expensive. To use a trivial example, when I got my ears pierced, they told me it would be obvious when my ears were fully healed. So, as soon as the pain and irritation got below a certain threshold, I changed my care routine. This resulted in my ears taking well over a year to fully heal because it took months for me to realize that they were in fact not done healing. The idea that I was supposed to actually feel nothing had never occurred to me. I assumed they had healed and this was just a new normal experience once they had gotten significantly better. You would be surprised at how easy it is to overlook things. Hell, I didn't know I had asthma despite regularly being unable to breathe and feeling like someone took a sledgehammer to my torso growing up. I did not get diagnosed until I was in my 20s, and the doctor clearly did not believe me until he tested me. I also did not know I was autistic growing up. I often had teachers or others like my own parents get furious with me, assuming I was not doing things on purpose, or just pretending to not understand. While sometimes I would get angry at these accusations, in the end I would internalize that something was wrong with me. Even if I believed that I was not in the wrong, I felt incapable of communicating why so others could understand. Even now, feeling pride in being autistic, it can be hard to not assume a miscommunication is automatically my fault. Internalized ableism is hard to weed out. Sometimes I even get upset with myself when my asthma acts up. I immediately think how it is my fault for not being better about exercise, or maybe it is not really that bad this time and I should be able to push through. You would think struggling to breathe would be a clear reminder to take it easy. But no, it is still hard.
The hardest thing I ever had to learn is to slow down and not do everything. I fight this to this day. I hate feeling left out, having to choose to stay home or to not get things done that I want to. Everything everyone else does comes so easy, but for me it is 100 little jobs in one. I need to think about the weather, my temperature that day, the whole day's plans before I can attack any one given thing. When other people can simply do things, I have to attack it and make a plan like I am strategizing a war.
This is made harder by all those outside judgments we have received over our lives. Thinking, maybe they are right, and there is something wrong with us. One of the only things I have found to help is to regularly be reminded of other people's experiences, both relating with other disabled folks, and that most people really are not dealing with what you are. When the party leaves Edward to rest and arrives at this cave, they discover it has a magnetic field. This is a problem because many of your characters use equipment that are metal. If any metal items are equipped, the character will be unable to do anything during battle. While some in your party are less affected by this, like Tella since he uses spells, and Yang is capable with his fists, all of the party will need to use worse armor or accessories, making them more vulnerable to attacks. The magnetic field is a great example of an environmental change that is disabling. The party has to experience something similar to what Edward always does. You will do far less damage than you have been used to, since Cecil, who is your main character throughout the story, relies on his sword and armor. He does have magic, but it is still quite weak as a new paladin. Sid is new to your party and has the ability to analyze the enemies for weaknesses, and you will see very few enemies have any. Except most of them are only weak to Cecil's weapon, which you cannot use. Taking advantage of these weaknesses is also how most mages do damages with their spells, meaning that even though Tella is a mage with access to almost all of the spells in the game, he struggles to do much damage without casting high level ones, which will quickly drain him of all his mana. And then, when you get to the boss, the Dark Elf defeats the party. They are saved by Edward when he begins playing his harp, which resonates over the item he gave them. The song sensory overloads the Dark Elf, causing a temporary break in the magnetic field so the party can fight the boss at full strength. It is a beautiful moment that portrays a simple act as heroic and highlights accessibility. That with the right tools and environment, there are many ways someone can contribute. When the party returns victorious, they have a new appreciation for Edward. Not just because he saved them, but because they can now understand his experience better. Usually in RPGs like these, we see characters get stronger as part of their arc. In fact, the original plan for Edward was to awaken some hidden powers after Anna dies. One team member, Akaeko Matsui, argued that a weakling does not stop being a weakling just because his girlfriend dies. Unfortunately, he didn't think much of Anna being fridged for her dad and boyfriend, but this decision with Edward has always stuck out to me, even though he has so little time with the party. He is such a beautiful example of the game's theme. Brute strength alone isn't power. Edward the Spoony Bard is a disabled hero from one of my favorite games growing up. Let a story remind you to take care of yourself and that you are worthy of love as you are. And don't let people fool you that there can be no disability in fantasy. Disabled experiences are everywhere, whether they are intended to be or not. There are a lot of disabled people around that you don't even know are disabled. And despite the term invisible disabilities, I don't think it is that we are actually invisible. It is a culture that has taught people to not see us, to assume others are lazy or flawed in some way when they have different needs. To my fellow Spoonies and disabled comrades, remember, you're not alone.
Farewell, my love.